Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday, December the 31st, 2024. And as always, or as too often perhaps in 2024, we're discussing AI on the last day of the year. A couple of days ago, we did a show with one of Australia's leading AI experts, Toby Walsh. He's writing a book, The Shortest History of AI, which will be out in April of 2025. And I wonder whether the shortest history of AI will get to 2027, because that's the year we're talking about today with my old friend Gary Marcus. He has a much publicized bet about where AI will be at the end of 2027. Gary is a well-known skeptic. I don't think he believes it will be quite where some of the optimists believe. But Gary is joining us from Montreal on this last day of 2024. Gary, Happy New Year. Why 2027? What's the big deal about that year? Why not talk about 26 or 28?
I mean, I think you could actually make bets about lots of things. And this particular bet actually originated in two bets that I offered Elon Musk, neither of which Musk responded to, even when the Wall Street Journal asked him to comment. One was about the end of 2025. Musk said we'd have machines that were smarter than the smartest humans by then. And the other was I had earlier offered Musk a bet around 2029. And so Miles Brundage came along and said, "Hey, I'll actually make that bet." Miles is a former OpenAI researcher who I've known for a while. And so we kind of split the difference and made this bet. You could think about it different ways, but we came up with some criteria based on the two bets I had offered Elon Musk previously. We kind of took those two and took the union of them, subtracted the robotic stuff, and came up with 10 metrics and say, look, will AI hit these? Now, whether those actually themselves would constitute AGI that people talk about is an open question, and we kind of allude to that without taking a stance. So we say, look, if you get a single machine to do most of these things, some of them are easy for the average human, some of them are hard for most humans, but possible for the best humans. If you could do a whole bunch of these and do it with, let's say, one system, that would really look like artificial general intelligence. We don't take the position that we're defining it here, although I give some criteria in the first of the bets that I offered Elon Musk. But we say, look, here are some practical benchmarks. We can see where we are. And I'm an AI skeptic in the sense that I really would like to see AI, but don't think that it's going to come as soon as people stand. So I'm betting these things won't, be universally solved by then. And on the other hand, Miles is pretty bullish that they will happen. As we note in a footnote, neither of us necessarily wants this to happen that fast because we haven't solved problems of alignment yet. So having a super smart machine by the end of 2027, if we didn't have ways to constrain it to do good things and not evil, might actually be a bad thing. So this is not a bet saying, hey, we want this to happen. It's just a kind of drawing some criteria that people can talk about and keep accountable to for what might happen in a few years. And part of it's because people are always saying, oh, you're moving the goalposts. So we're very firm about the goalposts, and we'll see what happens. Are you still there? I fear you're not here anymore.
Gary, my guess on Elon Musk, the reason he didn't take the bet is he probably didn't have the disposable cash. How much did you bet?
I don't think that was a problem. The first bet was for $100,000. The second one started at $1 million. Actually, the first one raised, I think, $500,000. And then the second one, I offered myself $1 million, and a friend raised it to $10 million. I don't think it was a cash issue, although he occasionally has cash flow problems. I think he didn't want to be held accountable. And what I like about Miles Brundage is he had more guts than Elon. He was saying, okay, make me accountable. Fine, cool.
Well, wouldn't it be fair to say, I don't want to turn this into another conversation, Gary, about Musk, but you're well known as a tech skeptic. You are perhaps the leading tech skeptic when it comes to AI these days. But isn't Musk also a skeptic? Didn't he fall out with Larry Page over their differences on AI? How would you describe Musk's take on AI?
I mean, I am often called an AI skeptic, and I, for shorthand, even said it myself. Let me clarify my position and then get to Elon's. my position is, of course, we're going to get to AGI eventually, but I don't think we're going to get there soon. And I think AI, AGI could be a good thing for humanity or a bad thing. And we talked or a few months ago about my recent book. I would like to see a positive outcome for AI rather than a negative outcome. And a lot of my work has been around trying to find that. So it's not that I think AI is impossible, but I'm very skeptical about generative AI, which is the stuff that is popular right now. I don't think it's anywhere near as useful as people think that it is. So that's one kind of skepticism. I'm also skeptical about whether it will be used for good rather than evil, and whether it's just going to be used to make the rich richer, or whether it's going to raise all boats and so forth. So there are lots of dimensions of skepticism, I suppose, and it's a little bit of a shorthand. So that's me. Elon, I think, certainly thinks we're going to reach AGI, thinks we're going to reach it sooner than I think, artificial general intelligence. He has expressed concerns that I think he really cares about, that AI could kill us all. I think that's maybe a little bit extreme, but certainly AI could cause a lot of harm. And he has expressed that for a long time, going back a decade. I think his only academic publication is about AI risk. He's been a little bit split, I guess you could say, because he has genuinely expressed those things. He has helped other people who want to look into those kinds of risks and so forth. And at the same time, he's building as fast as he can Grok to compete with all the other big AI systems. So I wouldn't say he's been entirely consistent, but there is a strand of him that is genuinely worried. And if, to the extent you want to call him an AI skeptic, I would say that that's why. In fact, somebody sent me the other day, one of these AI systems said the two leading AI skeptics were Gary Marcus and Elon Musk. It was a weird kind of claim, but you can see how people might say that in certain ways, looking at certain dimensions of the problem.
Geoffrey Hinton, of course, won the Nobel Prize in 2024 for physics for his contribution. He is another skeptic. Last week, I think he noted to the BBC that he thought there was somewhere between a 10 and 20% chance that we'll destroy ourselves through AI in the not too distant future. He would be included in the pantheon of AI skeptics, wouldn't he, Hinton?
I mean, that would be ironic, but I mean, because he's such a booster of generative AI in some ways, but his position is closer to Elon. So Hinton thinks that AGI is imminent. He thinks current machines understand language, which I would disagree with. I would say that their statistical predictors kind of autocomplete on steroids. We've had public arguments about that on an email list called Connectionists. So he's very not skeptical about the technical limitations right now. I'm much more skeptical about the technical limitations, but he's much more concerned about extinction risk than I am. I think that we should have human beings studying the possibility of extinction risk. He thinks it's 10 to, I thought it was even 30, but 10 to 20 or 30 in the next decade or two. And I don't think that we're going to see extinction there. I do think we could see very serious consequences. So I worry most about bad actors and what they might do with more and more powerful AI. Already with current AI, which I think is kind of stupid, it doesn't understand facts, and that makes it really good for generating misinformation. It's also really good at running certain kinds of scams and things like that. So risk and the power of an AI system are not equivalent, right? The risk from AI comes from however intelligent or unintelligent it is, combined with what do we ask it to do? What do we give it permission to do? So putting dumb AI in charge of nuclear weapons, which is legal in the United States currently, would be a really bad idea. It would be very risky.
Yeah, although I'm not sure it'd be any more risky than putting Elon Musk or Mark Andreessen in charge. Let me clarify a couple of things. Firstly, you've mentioned AGI, which is shorthand for artificial general intelligence. You also, and please correct me, Gary, I know you're not shy to correct anyone when they're wrong. Are you suggesting that the problem with the current state of AI is that the generative AI that Geoffrey Hinton seems to be the father or the godfather of is the wrong way to go? Is there a problem with generative AI? Can we get to AGI through generative AI, or do we need another kind of AI?
I mean, that's literally the $250 billion question, or some number like that.
Well, that's why I asked it.
So just for your audience, for context, what I mean by that is, almost the entire field of AI these days are focusing on generative AI systems. There have been hundreds of billions of dollars poured into infrastructure around those. My view is they might be part of the answer, but certainly not the whole answer. There might be one tool that we use, but we're going to need a whole collection of tools. To me, it's like the old saying about to a man who has a hammer, everything is a nail. This is one hammer. It's very effective for certain things, like you can use it for brainstorming because it can produce text that sort of sounds like what people are saying in certain contexts, but it's not very good at reasoning. It's not very good at facts. In fact, it really is kind of blind to facts. It's opaque and uninterpretable, which makes it difficult to debug. It makes it difficult for us to know what to make of it. It makes it very unpredictable from one moment to the next. I think it's a very unreliable foundation on which to build AI. The irony is people call these things foundation models, but Ernie Davis and I wrote a piece in The Gradient, I think it was in 2020, or maybe it was even 2019, saying, are these things a good foundation for AI? I still think that they're not, because they're not interpretable, they're not reliable, they're not very good at handling explicit knowledge, they're not good at causal reasoning, they're not good at abstract reasoning in general. They continue to suffer these problems. And so to me, like, yes, you do want in a larger cognitive system something that can predict statistical regularities pretty well, and this is a good system for that. But that's only part of what cognition is.
Is there an alternative, Gary, or are you speaking sort of in an imaginative way? Are there alternative systems to generative
There are
AI that
steps towards alternatives. So I think part of the answer has to lie in what I have long advocated, which I like to call neurosymbolic AI. I don't know who coined the term, but really the thrust of my whole career, going back 30 years, has been to say, hey, there are two general approaches to intelligence. One of them is about statistics, and the other is more about abstract reasoning. Kahneman liked to call these system one and system two. So system one is kind of like what we have with these neural networks today, where they're statistical, they're fast, they're reflexive. And system two is slow and deliberative and so forth. You can go all the way back to the history of AI, or maybe to Toby's short history. I haven't read it yet. You go back to the early days of AI in the 1940s, and people already had these two general ideas. By the 50s, they were already really working on them. They were already working on symbolic AI. That's what I would call system two. And they were already working on neural networks. So you had Minsky and McCarthy and so forth, the real godfathers of AI, in my view, or at least the original godfathers of AI, were already working on the symbolic side. And then you had Rosenblatt was already working on the neural network side back in the 1950s. There was a New Yorker article showing a picture of this giant thing called a perceptron that was supposedly going to solve AI. And the truth is, both of those approaches have failed. Neither of them have really given us anything like trustworthy, reliable AI. They're both brittle. They both need a lot of sort of hand holding and fixing things. So if you go back into the 80s, people had expert systems and they would fix them by hand. There was a lot of error checking, fixing if thens, and the word we used was brittle. Well, it turns out now the current systems are also brittle. OpenAI first was paying Kenyans $2 an hour to fix some things, and now they're offering $100 an hour for experts to fix other things. They're still brittle, they're still making a lot of mistakes. So what do? We have to combine, and this is only the first step, but we have to combine these two traditions and find a way for them to talk to each other much better than possible. Has been previously possible. One existence proof that this can be done is AlphaFold, which just won.
I was going to ask about DeepMind and Demis Hassabis. Does he represent? I mean, of course, Hassabis won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry this year as the founder of DeepMind, whereas Hinton
co-won it. Yeah.
So are these? So is Hassabis offering, or at least DeepMind offering a broader alternative, do you think, to Hinton's generative AI, which of course originally was authored as a Google white paper, ironically?
Yeah, I mean, Hinton didn't actually make the critical paper here. His work went back earlier, arguing for neural networks in general. And then the Transformer paper was written in 2017 at Google. Neither Hinton nor Hassabis were a part of that paper. And that's what everybody is leveraging now. I would say, to your question, that Demis has a much broader, I think, more scientific view than many of his competitors do. So he has, for example, explored neurosymbolic AI in a way that the other companies either haven't or haven't publicly done. very much. There's some work at Microsoft, in fairness, but in general, the competitors have mostly focused just on the large language models, and DeepMind, Demis, DeepMind under Demis's guidance, has always looked at a broader set of things. It's always had a kind of research institute in its blood that has looked at a broader range. That said, everything I hear word on the street is they're mostly focused on large language models and not so much of the other stuff right now. But they do have, I think, stronger roots toward looking in a broader way that I think will be, excuse me, important in the years to come.
Gary, your book that came out this year, you were on the show talking about it. Taming Silicon Valley was one of the best books selected by the New Yorker, and also Politico selected it as one of the best digital books on futures. Another book that did very well this year, actually won the Financial Times Business Book of the Year, was Palmy Olson's Supremacy, AI, ChatGPT, and the Race That Will Change the World. She's been on the show a couple of times. In fact, she was on last week. She believes that 2025 will be the year in which Google, and you touched on this earlier, will pull ahead of OpenAI because of its deeper economic and organizational roots. Do you expect in 2025 Google to begin to be supreme? You were on Fox earlier this year comparing OpenAI perhaps to WeWork, which of course was a catastrophe. What's your take on the corporate battle for supremacy of AI? I want to get, of course, to your 10 metrics for AGI in a second, but I'm intrigued by your take on the Google versus OpenAI struggle.
I still think OpenAI faces a lot of headwinds. Google has its own problems. I don't think I would want to make as precise a prediction as 2025 is when it flips, but I would say that OpenAI is not making money. They're losing money. They had an advantage with ChatGPT that has largely been replicated by multiple other companies by now. So they have no moat to protect them. They've had a lot of internal corporate problems. They've lost a lot of key players over the last, I would say, 12 months, lost a lot of talent. Google, I would say, is deeper, but they've also lost a lot of talent too. I don't think AGI is going to come out of either of those companies this year. I think that generative AI is not that profitable. I think Google has had problems with putting this stuff into search and getting ridiculous answers. Like, I think they both actually have some challenges this year. Meanwhile, China has caught up very quickly, in part because Meta has given away its large language models to the world, and China has been able to leverage those. So, for example, they made a much more efficient, although in some ways limited, model that just was released on Thursday, called, I forget if it's the model or the company is called DeepSeek. So, like, it's still kind of anybody's ball game in a way. And if what I say about neurosymbolic turns out to be right, and there are more and more people talking in that way, then that might still take us, 5 or 10 years to get right. And so I don't know that we're going to see a winner in 2025. I do think that OpenAI is stumbling, and that's becoming more apparent to the world. That doesn't guarantee that anyone else is going to fill the vacuum. That might require developing a more solid technology that nobody really has yet. And yes, Google is maybe better positioned to do that, but placing a year on it would be a very difficult thing, I think.
And then I assume you would throw in Anthropic with the two of them, that they're all doing similar things with generative AI.
And Facebook is too, and Grok, or whatever the X.AI is. So there are many people. I mean, like a basketball metaphor, it's kind of a jump ball here with everybody crowded around the net. And it might even turn out that they're all crowded around the wrong net.
Could the wrong net be Facebook seems to be making a bet on what it calls open source AI with Llama. It's not entirely clear what that means. And of course, Zuckerberg is not someone who gives away anything for free. Should we
he has given away
that comes out of Facebook when it comes to what they call open source AI?
I mean, there are a few questions around that. But the first thing I would say is that's a different axis. So we might want to clarify who's going to make money, who's going to solve these problems of hallucinations and unreliability. And then should things be open? So these are all different questions, and their answers may intermingle, but they're sort of logically separable ones. So the open idea is that you give away the model. In the traditional notion of open source, you give away your entire program, and then anybody can fix the bugs, and that has been very valuable in pushing the internet forward. But we're not talking about web browsers. We're talking about software that has the potential to really dramatically shape society. So even if you could do the same things, you might not want to, especially since we don't know how to align these things to human goals and so forth. And then, we might not want bad actors to have access. So one question within the open source is like, do we want to give this stuff away? Another one that people don't really talk about is the main reason that we open source things before was so people could fix the code. And most of what OpenAI, I'm sorry, what OpenAI is not giving you anything away. Most of what Facebook has been opening is just the weights for a neural network model, but not the entire process. And you can't just fix them. So if a model says that I own a pet chicken named Henrietta, you can't just fix that except by adding a band-aid on the end. And so they're not fixable in the same way as traditional software. So I'm not sure we're getting the same leverage in terms of the community building on things. So there's a little bit of kind of drafting on a popular idea without really doing the same thing. But the whole thing is kind of an open mess, and we don't really know the right answer. The other thing I would add there is I don't know that I want Zuckerberg to decide for us. It could be that having given all this stuff away to China was really a huge mess in hindsight. We'll find out. And Zuckerberg basically made that decision unilaterally or with his sidekick Jan LeCun, but without really consulting with the world. That may turn out to be bad. My view is that the answer to AGI lies elsewhere, and so this is really just a dress rehearsal for true AGI when we get there.
So I'm quoting you here from what you said earlier, Gary. You said, of course, we are getting to AGI eventually, which from a noted AI skeptic is quite, some people might say optimistic or uplifting. Some people might say chilling. Does it really matter then whether it's 2027 or 2020 or 2031? I mean, is the eventually, could it be another 100 years? What kind of time frame are we talking about?
In the same Substack that I keep, I had a debate with Grady Booch, who's a noted software developer, software architect. And he took the position that it wouldn't happen this century. And I took the position that it would happen this century. But there's a long way between 2027 and the end of this century. So it might, in fact, take several decades, even if I'm right about both bets, right? It's a fairly big range. It makes a big difference for multiple reasons. So one is on the technical side, there's a question, do we have the right tool? Is the $250 billion bet the right bet, or has that been squandering money? Maybe this is just the wrong technique. And then like, if it isn't going to work, who's holding the bag? So like pension funds put money into this and may not get their money back. So there's an economic side to that. There is a practical side of like, are we ready to actually have AGI? If somebody could flip a switch and say, okay, humans, do you want this right now? We don't actually know that it would be a good thing, especially given our primitive understanding of how to so-called align these systems. And maybe, having another 2 decades might be fantastic because it might give us more time to know what to do with these powers. There's a cognitive psychologist, evolutionary psychologist, Jeffrey Miller, who observed something like, why don't we just wait a couple centuries till we solve the alignment problem? And maybe he was being hyperbolic, but I see his point too. Like, if we don't have a good solution to the alignment problem and the machines just do take over, that's not good. And so maybe we want to wait until we're clearer about what we're going to do with it. So there's the technical side of how we get there. There's the economic side of whether we're making the right bets. And there's the humanity side of like, are we ready for this technology? Nobody really knows the answer to any of those things.
Not even AI, I guess. You've
not
used
even AI. I mean, ChatGPT will make up some bogus answer, but like nobody really knows.
You use this term several times, alignment problem. We've done shows on this, books have been written about it. What do you mean by the in alignment
So
problem?
the term's not originally mine, but the general notion is you want machines to do things that are, as Stuart Russell likes to say, compatible with humans. I mean, technically speaking, you can have a broad definition. And I think it's interesting to think of a broad definition, which is like you set a goal to a machine, does it do it? The alternative is like the sorcerer's apprentice. You set a goal and it doesn't do what you really wanted it to do, and it doesn't do something that's actually good for humans. And so simple examples are you would like to just say to the machine, don't hallucinate stuff, don't make stuff up. In fact, Apple has that in their system prompt now, but it doesn't work. So the system does not obey the instruction of don't make stuff up. That's a failure of alignment. And then there are more dramatic versions, like don't, like Asimov's law, basically, don't do harm to humans. Well, if you put an LLM in a robot, as some people are planning to do now, in a humanoid robot in a home, and you say don't do harm to humans, it's just not going to be able to reliably follow that. That's a failure to align. And a really broad version would be like Nick Bostrom's. I think it's kind of silly, but his example of the paperclip thing, where you tell the system to make paperclips, and that's all it does, and it eventually turns human beings into paperclips. And we don't want that, obviously. I have problems with that particular scenario, but it is an example writ broadly of what a lack of alignment might look like.
Well, let's talk about 2027. As you said earlier, you made a bet with Miles Brundage about where AI will be. He believes we'll be at AGI. You don't think so. You're a skeptic here. You've talked about 10 metrics. I'm not sure I want to go over all 10. Why don't you pick out 2 or 3 that you think are key?
Well, first, let me give the spirit of them, and then maybe we can dive into 1 or 2. The spirit was to have a range of things, ranging from stuff like any ordinary person ought to be able to do. Like, number one, you can watch a movie, know what's going on. If there's some plot twist, and at the end somebody says, "I see dead people," everybody in the room understands what "I see dead people" means, even if they've never heard it in a film before, and it changes everything that they understood about the film. So an AI should be able to do that. It should be able to follow a story unfolding, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or whatever. And ordinary people can do that. I'm not talking about, some bizarre film from the end of the 1960s, but just take a mainstream film. You should be able to follow along as well as anybody sitting in the audience can, right? So that's like maybe the easiest of them. There's a similar thing with novels. At the opposite extreme, we wanted things that are like only the best humans can do them, like write a screenplay that could win an Academy Award. We don't say does actually win an Academy Award, but we say, an Oscar caliber film or a Nobel caliber scientific discovery. So these are things some people do, maybe some people do every year. They're not quite being the world champion in chess, which is actually a solved problem. But they're things that, would be very impressive if machines could do. So we have a mix of those things. And, the bet is structured such that I win the bet or let's say differently. Miles wins the bet if at least 8 of them are solved by machines. We also have a comment that artificial general intelligence would really mean like one system can solve all of these with only a modest amount of focused work on each particular problem.
So why are you so confident? Why are you putting serious money on the table, Gary, that we're not going to be there by 2027?
I think that there's just too many unsolved problems. Like I look at all of this from a perspective of a cognitive psychologist, right? So I spent a lot of my career doing developmental and cognitive psychology, looking at humans, looking also always comparing with neural networks and trying to isolate.
Kahneman style.
I mean, some. And I mean, I know Kahneman for many different reasons. He was a friend, and there are many strands of his work that overlapped with my work. And we used to go out to lunch and have a great time talking about all this stuff. Um, so, looking at it from the perspective of cognitive psychology, I would say, to quote some other friends, Chaz Firestone and Brian Scholl, that the mind is not one thing but many. There are many different components to cognition, and some of them we have good ways of doing with machines right now, like kind of statistical analysis of large scale text. We have fantastic tools for that. And some of them we just don't really do very well right now. So these systems, I'll give you one from Kahneman that not everybody knows. Kahneman wrote about something he called object files. And an object file kept track of an individual entity, kind of like a 3x5 card devoted to that. And we presumably have some means for doing that for individual objects, for individual people. We track people and objects over time. Current neural networks are really not very good at that. I wrote about this in my 2001 book, and that's where I really anticipated hallucinations, was in the 2001 book, giving an example built around object
And
files. I
that was
think I
the algebraic mind, the
that was in my
2001
book, The
book.
Algebraic Mind, and I had this example of my Aunt Esther winning the lottery. I said if she were to win the lottery, these systems would overgeneralize this to other people that share characteristics with her. So she was living in Boston, she worked at Harvard, so it would generalize to other people living in Boston, working at Harvard or something like that. There would be bleed through. I didn't use the word hallucination, but that's what I was talking about in 2001, is there would be hallucinations because you don't have these good object file-like representations like Kahneman had talked about and various other people, logicians had talked about. And I said, these neural networks aren't very good at that. They still aren't. There are other things like compositionality, putting together a sentence from the individual words and really understanding what it is. You can still see that the current systems are not reliable at that and so forth. So when I look at this from the perspective of a cognitive psychologist, what would be the prerequisites for having human-like cognition? I just don't think the systems are here yet. And I don't think we're that close. And then I also spent some time in industry. I built a company that I sold to Uber and so forth. And I know from industry and having watched other companies and so forth, it's just hard to take new ideas and put them into place. So even in the best case, if some bright young graduate student really had answers to all of the things that I've worried about right now, getting all of that into production and working well by the end of 2027 would be a tall order.
So what should we? I take your point on 2027. We'll actually have to get Miles Brundage on the show, maybe to take the other position. But what can we expect? You're an AI skeptic, but you're not an AI Luddite. You believe that it's changing the world, and you said we're eventually going to get to AGI. What can we expect, Gary, in 2025? Can we expect AI assistants? I know those are rather...
In 2025, we can expect them, but they won't work reliably. So what's going to happen in 2025 is that the assistants are going to be built out of large language models because that's our best available tool. And large language models have all the problems I've talked about, hallucinations and so forth. And so the agents are going to do that. When you put together 10 LLMs, you're still going to get hallucinations. It's not going to make them magically disappear. And this is not going to work well. So, for example, some people will set these agents to do financial transactions for them. And it'll work a lot of the time, like 80% of the time. But sometimes it'll make a really big blunder. Like you'll say, put $100 on this stock and it puts $100,000 on this stock. And now you're like, what happened to my money? And it's going to cost me a lot to unwind this transaction or whatever. And where people will use them for medical things and it will sometimes, give them the wrong advice, etc. And so what I think is going to happen is like we've seen so many times before, there'll be a lot of hype. People get excited. There'll be a lot of influencers writing articles about how the world is about to change and yada yada. And then it's not really going to work and it will sort of quietly fade. Agents will happen, agents that we can count on, but there are many problems in building them. Another problem is just that the world isn't really set up for them. So you look at things like Alexa and Siri. Alexa and Siri in 2024 are not that much better than they were in 2020. And part of that's because if you wanted them to do everything, they'd have to connect to like every service that's out there. And like, you want them to order flowers, but this florist isn't online, or, this restaurant doesn't answer its phone and stuff like that. And so the things that people imagine agents to do are actually kind of hard because the infrastructure isn't there in addition to the AI problems. And so what's going to happen is people will try it and get excited, but it won't work as well as they want. And a few influencers will use them every day and say, it changed my life. And most people will be like, yeah, come back to me later.
And then what would you like to see happen on the AI front in 2025? Your last book is on taming Silicon Valley, on regulating a lot of this stuff. You've been featured in the media throughout this year in terms of your need to regulate AI. You believe that AI has not just structural technological shortcomings, but moral shortcomings. You've also talked about a generative AI boycott to push for regulation. What would you like to see happen on the regulatory front, Gary, in 2025?
I'm afraid in the United States, we're going to see nothing happen. In Europe, they're going to try to kind of beat the AI Act into shape, and that's going to be quite controversial. So, they passed this big AI Act, but the details really matter a lot for how you evaluate, what is a violation, for what enforcement there is, and so forth. And so, the most interesting stuff in regulation in 2025 will probably actually happen in Europe. The US has abdicated its role in deciding AI regulation, and the incoming administration doesn't want any or wants very little regulation around AI. We've already seen around the edges they want to do things like probably driverless car accidents won't need to be reported anymore. My view is, as we undermine even the existing regulation and don't put anything in place, American citizens are going to wind up as sitting ducks for whatever might go wrong. So we will see, a whole bunch of fatalities probably around driverless cars. We've already seen some. We'll probably see more. We're more vulnerable if we don't have regulation around that. We're seeing lots of bias in employment decisions. It's unlikely that in 2025 the United States is going to do anything about it. What I would like to see is what I laid out in the book. And there are many aspects to it. It's not a single line, but many. But most important, I would say, the one that we might get is an AI agency. We might actually get that. Two would be but what we won't get is some kind of pre-flight check, basically saying, does this system do more good than harm, in the way that we have done with the FDA with drugs. We may even see that abolished, which would be terrible. But we should have pre-flight testing, essentially, and we do this for airplanes too, for large-scale deployed AI systems. So people should be able to do what research they want to do. But if you're going to deploy something to 100 million people, you should make sure that the risks are minimal. And I'll give you an example of where we're actually headed. Is that the latest, or maybe I guess the second latest OpenAI model, O1, reportedly causes an elevated risk that people might use it for bioweapons. And O1, in one of their own papers, they talk about this, could increase the chance that people misuse them for bioweapons. That should be something society gets a chance to weigh in on. So should we release this system? Or O3 has been previewed but not actually released. O3 might further elevate the risk of bioweapons. And that's not such a great idea. And it shouldn't be up to a single person to decide whether we release it. There should be some kind of government review process if you're going to release something that might potentially cause large scale harm. And then there should be an auditing process. Once something is released, we should be able to look at it. So, to give you an example there, we know that people are using chatbots to evaluate job applications. They throw in the files, they say, should I hire them? And we also know that this discriminates against people who aren't white males. We don't know the magnitude of this problem. We don't know if it's like, 1% of the hiring decision or a big part of the hiring decision. We don't know if this is happening, once a day or 1,000 times a day or a million times a day. Well, maybe millions implausible, but 10,000 times a day might be plausible. We don't have that data, and we don't have any institutional way to allow people to access it. So you have wonderful young researchers like Abiba Berhana who've done a great job looking at the publicly available data and showing some of these harms. But people like her aren't allowed to look at the corporate data that is behind the veil to see how bad they are in practice. And people, legitimate researchers like Berhana should be able to access it, or Deb Raji and so forth. They're doing great work, and they're stymied by a corporate veil that's hiding what might be a lot of dirty laundry.
Final question, Gary. What are the chances in 2025 of there being, if not an existential event a la Geoffrey Hinton, which does away with our species entirely, but the kind of event that will even force the American public and both American political parties to recognize that there's a need to regulate this new technology?
Maybe 25%. So I have a piece coming out in Politico next week, talking about cybercrime as one of the manifestations that we might see in the next year. I give a whole bunch of different reasons. Maybe I'll save it for the Politico column, but I give 4 different reasons why our risk of having a major cyber attack induced by generative AI, directly or indirectly, is much higher than it's been before. And so we could see something like that. You think about these attacks like WannaCry and so forth that took down the British healthcare system for a while. We might see something like that. I would say the chance is at least like 1 in 4 that we will see some event that's like that, or some scam that takes 100,000 people's retirement savings, or something like something big enough for the public to notice and say, "Hey, this passive approach that Washington, particularly that the Congress and Senate have taken, is not enough. We really need action here." So I would say that, before the end of 2025, there's a significant chance that the public will be like, "Come on, guys, we got to do something here."
You're not going to help people sleep. Are you sleeping at night, Gary?
I've actually, aside from this, been taking a little time off to play with electronic music and take a break from thinking about all of this. But I enjoy your show, and I thought it was a good place to get people aware.
Well, Gary Marcus, as always, it's great to have an enlightened skeptic on the show. Happy New Year, Gary. I hope to see you in Munich at DLD, and we will do this hopefully more than once in 2025. Thank you so much.